Well, in New York morning trade, we are looking at U.S. stock futures turning nearly flat on the session, while cryptos coming back with Bitcoin and ETH turning higher. And this does come as President Trump is speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos. While in the U.S., the Senate Banking Committee pulled its vote on a sweeping crypto bill after Coinbase withdrew its support, leaving the timeline unclear. The bill would clarify regulatory authority between the SEC, the CFTC, and set new rules for digital assets. Now, other industry groups still back the legislation, but any final bill would need to clear multiple committees before reaching Trump. And Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong saying he will continue working on a U.S. crypto market structure bill despite a public break with its current version. He does plan to discuss the proposal with top bank executives in Davos. Well, joining me without further ado from the World Economic Forum in Davos is Cleve Mesidor, Executive Director and member of Board of Directors at the Blockchain Foundation. Cleve, so great to have you on. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. So you are part of the Global Blockchain Business Council's central delegation to Davos. So first and foremost, tell me about the gathering and some of the conversations taking place.
Yeah, well, it's my first Davos, and the World Economic Forum is definitely an interesting and wonderful, gathering. So the theme when it comes to digital assets is tokenization. There's not a lot of focus on hype. So you're not going to see the words crypto or Web3, but across the gatherings, wherever you see a conversation around the digital finance, the future of money, tokenization is on the table. We see things like Nigeria announcing their first house. And on the program, we definitely see the conversations around digital assets. Same thing with Brazil. And these are regions that have become leaders. And certainly the USA House, like you mentioned, Trump is here. I just watched his speech that read a lot like a state that began to read to sound a lot like the State of the Union. But the USA House has become a hub for the crypto industry, for digital assets. They had a digital assets summit yesterday. Yesterday, I moderated a panel for GBBC that you mentioned. The panel was on tokenization. So there's a lot of enthusiasm around, tokenizing money, digitizing money, fractionalizing, different assets. But the conversation is also about how do we get there? What are some of the obstacles? The why, the where, and the what.
Yeah, and Cleve, as you mentioned, tokenization is something that we're watching as we head into the rest of 2026. So what is actually moving from pilot projects to real world adoption right now?
Yeah, as I shared, tokenization is a term that is subjective. When you think about fractionalizing, securities or digitizing minerals like gold, or tokenizing securities, tokenizing deposits. So it varies. And so we've seen when we look at real world assets in the US, real estate is one where we talk about, right? But we've also seen leaders talk about, recording securities on blockchain. That has legs as well. But I think the issue is not what's possible for tokenization. It's one, how do institutions absorb the risk when it comes to banks, but also the fragmented regulatory framework that exists. Some jurisdictions are still in the process of putting that framework. You mentioned the market structure bill and the Senate breakdown that happened right before we came to Davos. There's a component there to talk about tokenization, and we've seen tokenization firms in the U.S. say that they like the bill. They think it's a good start. So it's not a question of is tokenization real. It has definitely bridged the gap between DeFi and TradFi, but it's the where, which jurisdiction. Absolutely, UAE has emerged as a hub. Brazil with PIX has for a while looked at tokenization, but for now, there's a lot of questions. Regulatory fragmentation is certainly one of them. We talked about that in the panel I moderated yesterday during the GBBC panel.
And Cleve, finally, before I let you go, artificial intelligence. Tell us where artificial intelligence fits in, especially when it comes to digital assets.
Oh my goodness. Well, the biggest theme at Davos to this year is AI. AI, AI, AI. At the intersection of everything, at the intersection of digital assets, at the intersection of quantum, AI for climate change, AI for healthcare in terms of health outcomes. It talks about AI and really looking at the brain. So there's a lot beyond the intersectionality we've talked about AI. I'm loving the conversations around quantum and that intersection. But certainly with we've been talking about the intersection with AI and crypto for a while. So these conversations are deepening, but they're different here depending on where you are in the world, what's happening in the world. Certainly emerging technologies, what I've seen in Davos is that development is happening differently across the world depending on how much the country is investing, and which goes to the global competitiveness conversation. And that is why the US is important. That's why we need to advance digital asset policy in the US. We need market structure legislation to be competitive, but we also need to make sure it's bipartisan as well. Excited to have these conversations in Davos, not just in the US, because regulatory policy has to become borderless. We have to look at harmonization of policies, and I'm encouraged that we can get there.
Well, Cleve, we will have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us as you attend the World Economic Forum in Davos.
Thank you.